Hello, and thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. And of course, co-host Heidi is here too. Let's start with you then, Natalie. Can you tell us just a bit about your background and your setup at home?
Yeah, sure. So I am the founder of Power Thoughts, which is a coaching service that I created initially to help children tap into the power of their own thoughts, giving them the tools and the awareness to know that, I don't have to believe every thought I think. I don't have to respond to all these feelings that I feel. But over time, it's definitely, my work also involves supporting parents and caregivers because we also have big feelings as adults. And for many of us, we weren't maybe modeled or taught how to regulate our emotions. And so, as I say to parents, these are skills that you're learning yourself, but it's skills that you're also trying to teach your child. Prior to this, I was a primary school teacher for over about 14 years. So I spent a lot of time in year one, nursery, reception, and then moved to, all the other year groups. And I've spent a lot of time with children. So over the course of Power Thoughts, I've worked with about 40,000 children. So I think I've got an extensive experience of stepping into their world. Obviously not all one-to-ones. I do a lot of school workshops and so forth. But I love it, and I really enjoy being able to give children the tools that I wish I had learned as a child. And I know many parents echo that as well, saying, when I teach that, when I work with their children, it's like, I wish I'd learned this. I'm having to learn this for myself as well. So, yeah.
Wow. So is that what inspired you to go from primary school teacher to the coaching?
Well, yeah, a little bit of a join the dots. So I was actually always inspired by human development and understanding why people behave the way that they do. So I'm from South Africa. And I was never really sure what I wanted to do, and teaching was one of the options that had come up. So however, in my first year of teaching, I realized actually psychology is the route that I want to go down. But I decided to do my psychology degree alongside the teaching degree. So I did that for about three years. And then I got qualified as a teacher, and out of interest, but also laziness, because I wasn't ready to get a job in the big wide world, I was like, let me apply for my honors in psychology and stay at home for another year. But that I absolutely loved. And then that got me on this journey of, could I become an educational psychologist? But I decided to then, after the honors, take a break and actually use my degree, my teaching degree. So that led me to come over to the UK. I taught for a couple of years. And that's really when I was starting to think, do you know what? I love the psychology kind of background that I have, but I'm not quite sure if that's the route I want to go down. So initially I dabbled a bit within the fitness industry because I wasn't happy as a teacher, more just around obviously the paperwork and all the boxes you have to tick, and I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So initially I thought, well, let me become a fitness instructor. And it was actually when I was still teaching at a school, doing fitness classes on the side, that the head teacher said to me, oh, we found this coaching course, that this PE coaching, you like your physical education. So it's a taste, it's that, but it was actually a taster to life coaching or performance coaching. And I was like, oh my goodness, okay, this ticks the box. So I then did that part-time, and it was then during that process, after I qualified, I'm like, well, what do I now do with this coaching qualification? And I was working actually with a group of year sixes. So that's here in the UK, they children that go from primary to secondary. They were really stressed out about going to secondary school, about their 11 plus exams, and many of them doing school interviews. And it just dawned on me, I was like, why are we not teaching children about their thoughts? Because one particular boy, I'll never forget, said to me, Miss, I've got this school interview, but I'm boring. I've got nothing interesting to say because so-and-so said to me ages ago, I'm boring. And that's really where I was like, wow, this is a story that he can keep with him if we don't kind of nip it in the bud now, and I could relate to that because I had the story I carried with myself that I'm uncool and that, I'm one of the weird ones, the one that doesn't quite fit in. And that's really what made me think there is nothing that I could see at that point around really tapping into thoughts and mindset and alongside emotional regulation. And that really then sparked the idea of power thoughts and supporting children, giving them what I wanted. Actually, and then adding to that, Heidi, I also really struggled with anxiety as a little girl. Probably from about 7 or 8, I used to call them my worries. And so even more so, why I could really relate to what some of these children were saying. And it was only much later, through psychology and then the coaching, that I was like, why has nobody ever taught me this? I don't actually have to believe all the stuff I'm telling myself, it's not true. And so that was a big driving factor behind what I do now as well.
I wish more of this was covered in the curriculum, actually, at school, because obviously they have their academic things that they have to learn, but to learn about feelings and thoughts and emotions, and especially anxiety. So much of the population suffers with anxiety these days. And I think children are probably more exposed to it off the back of COVID. You mentioned children in year 6. This is so personal to me because I have a 10-year-old who is in year 6. And she's really suffering at the moment. She suffers very, very badly with anxiety. So if I take her anywhere to a new place where there's different people, she will cling to me for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before she will then be able to let go of my hand and interact with other children. And her emotional ability, I would say, is of a 3-year-old. Even though she's 10, she still has tantrums. She finds it hard to share. She seems to want to be negative about everything. Everything is no. I still have a battle with her in the morning to get her up for school. We have the same routine every morning. Put your clothes on, brush your hair, brush your teeth. And it's always a huge battle. And I've only recently been brave enough to talk about this to other parents, and actually they've got similar experiences, and so suddenly I don't feel so isolated and alone and embarrassed anymore, because this seems to be a bit of an issue for quite a lot of parents out there. But for me, I don't know where to start. I know she needs some help, and I know I need some help on how to get her to talk about her feelings and emotions, because she just can't. Every time I ask her questions, she just either doesn't respond at all, or she'll say to me, I don't know. My friend recommended some mood cards, which I've now got for her, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know where to start with them. I don't know what to do with them. So when you were coming onto this podcast, I was like, oh, this could be something that's really interesting, and you might be able to help us parents in getting our children to talk and explore their feelings and getting them to handle them better.
And I think, you're definitely not alone. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it can be really isolating when, the parents I work with, the challenges that you face, and then, but what's the matter? It's only me. Am I doing something wrong? Where am I going wrong in this? And it can be really, it is isolating. And I think actually the more we shine a light on it and talk about these challenges, because I hear this all the time and it's very common. And so to say, you touched there as well, I think, anxiety, I've definitely seen, the emotional resiliency of children is different now to what it was prior to COVID. So, for all those years as being a classroom teacher, and then obviously I started Power Thoughts and prior to COVID as well. But we have to understand that, there were at least a good 2.5 years that children, those everyday bumps and challenges that children would face. So the everyday transitions, the everyday separations from you, the fallout with their friend, the mistakes they made, all those like little things, that's not a big deal, but they all add up to kind of build that muscle of like emotional resiliency, helping them to learn to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. So for a long period of time that was taken away. They're very comfortable then being with us. For many parents, children with us 24/7. So now, coming out of the back end of that, yes, you've got a 10-year-old, but I'd often say, that emotional resiliency, it's at least 2.5 years back. So we have to take a bit of that bird's eye perspective of we've, you know, I mean, I still think we sometimes still in COVID, as you know, we're still going through the aftermath of that. We're not back to where we were. I think many of us are struggling. But it's just taking that bird's eye view of actually, okay, there's a much bigger thing at play here. We'll absolutely get through it. Like, you know, I'm preaching doom and gloom, but it's managing our expectations there. The other thing also to bear in mind is when it comes to things like transitioning, when it comes to separation, when it comes to flexibility, when it comes to getting ready, so, you know, being organized, getting ready, when it comes to tolerating frustration and difficult emotions, all of those things are executive functioning skills of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Now, the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to be developed. You know, and research has shown that it's only fully developed by the age of about mid-20s. So all of those things that we think they should do, you shouldn't be so clingy, you should be able to organize yourself. I mean, I was doing a group call just before this about, you know, my child should be able to get himself out of the house on time. Shifting that should to skill. She still needs to develop the skill of being more independent. She still needs to develop the skill of being organized, because those are, that part of her brain that's responsible for those skills isn't fully developed. It's the same as if I say to the two of you, you know, right, I expect you to speak, I don't know, fluent Afrikaans within a week's time, and hoping you can't, right? That's by the time and then I'm like, but why aren't you? But what's the matter with you? But you should be able to, but you should, but come on, you've got to speak quick. You simply can't, because you haven't developed the skills yet. And so we have to, as parents and caregivers, it's be that substitute prefrontal cortex for them. And that means we've got to coach, we've got to guide, we've got to show. But that's where it becomes really tricky, because our uncomfortable emotions appear. We feel helpless. We feel frustrated. We're impatient. And of course, because we're human beings, you're not robots. But it's for many of us as adults, we were not taught or guided or shown how to work with difficult emotions, or how to tolerate them, or how to sit with them. We want to fix. We want to, like, well, it shouldn't be like, let's fix this. It shouldn't have this. Let's fix this. Versus, okay, you know what? Let me sit with this helpless feeling I have right now. Like, hand on my heart, deep breath. This is really hard. No wonder I'm finding this hard, because it's really difficult feeling like I can't help her. And it's okay for me to feel like that. It doesn't make me a bad mum. It doesn't mean that, you know, that there's anything wrong with me or my parenting. This is a normal thing to have. And I will get through this. Okay, let me sit with that feeling. But that's the uncomfortable bit, because we're not being taught how to sit with that. We want to fight against it. And yes, of course, you know, there's many year sixes and year sevens and year eights at the moment that I'm working with, older children that you'd think wouldn't suffer with separation anxiety are really struggling. Now, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I really do see an increase in that since COVID versus before COVID, where it was more, you know, my experience was it was a lot of younger kids. But it's okay, seeing this as, okay, these are skills we need to help her develop, skills to help her develop, learning to work through tricky feelings, learning to work through that uncomfortable feeling, skills to develop emotional regulation for herself and for me, right? I need to develop this as well. But also these are skills to help develop that transition and slowly build those confidence muscles over time. And one of the things, you know, I think when it comes to the emotions, and I've shared this quite a bit over like on socials, is about befriending those feelings. So seeing those feelings as just visitors, they come and they go. And just like I've got excitement, I've got joy, I've got worry, I've got boredom, I've got anger. So normally what I do with children when we say run anxiety, it is about, okay, well, let's create a character of this anxiety. So one of the girls I actually worked with ages ago, she called hers eggplant. Okay, when does eggplant make its appearance, right? So I know it's just eggplant on a Sunday night, and you know it's going to be there when I do PE, but I might not notice it when I'm playing with my friend down the road. So you can then start to address it. Oh, it looks like we've got a visitor here. Eggplant's here. What do you think it's trying to tell you? Where do you feel eggplant in your body? But you come up with your own version of that. Where do I notice worry in my body? Is it heavy? Is it light? And when we can personify those feelings, it also helps us then, and for children, to begin to recognize, I can feel the feeling, but I don't need to be the feeling. And okay, eggplant's visiting us now, but we also know that, you know, I don't know, Fruity Loopy, whatever, the happy feeling is going to come visit me a little bit later on as well. But it's when we can have these conversations with our children, and even if they don't want to do it, you do it. And you say, you know, I've been thinking, I sometimes feel really worried, and I've learned this exercise, then I'm going to actually create a character of my worry. And this is where I feel my worry. And actually, this is when I notice worry and it feels heavy. Okay, I'm just going to sit with it for a bit and like breathe, you know, deep, you know, we do regulatory tools, breathe into it. And so even when you're doing that and you're modeling it, that's how they learn. And also when we hold, you know, when we can start to look at some of these tricky feelings and we're just asking questions about, okay, let's sit with it. One of my favorite questions actually is, we don't always get an answer, but I have had some insightful answers from kids, is, you know, if your worry could speak, what would it say to you? Or what does your, you know, what does eggplant want you, what does he need most help with right now? What's he struggling with or she struggling with? Because when you're just taking time to sit in it without fixing it, you're also showing them it's okay to feel this feeling. I don't need to be alone in this. And you're teaching them how to tolerate those uncomfortable feelings versus trying to suppress or deny. So, I mean, those are a few starting points. I've realized I've been talking about 5 minutes flat. So I hope that provides some food for thought.
No, absolutely. That's really, really helpful. That's absolutely fascinating. And I think for me, it's hard because I've got a 13-year-old son as well, who's complete opposite. So this has been a real challenge for me to have a child that's just so different.
And that's very common. One is completely the opposite to the other one. And I know we've, you know, I don't know if you've come across it, I've definitely come across it, but I always, and sometimes it can be really triggering, so compassion, but it is, okay, what is this relationship teaching me right now? What this situation of her struggling with this, what is it highlighting to me, maybe where I need to grow in terms of maybe my patience, in terms of me. So often, not, you know, putting a blanket on, but so often it comes to, okay, how can I expand my window of tolerance for this uncomfortable emotion that I'm feeling right now? But it's tough. And that's where compassion for yourself is really important.
So powerful, isn't it? Do you, in terms of the generational shift, because I guess, I don't want to make assumptions, but we're all kind of similar age, and the way we brought up was very different. And, you know, obviously our parents very different to that in terms of like keeping a stiff upper lip. And now we like are starting to talk about emotions. And, you know, I think us three are probably quite empathetic with that. But do you see a real generational shift? And how do you help parents who are perhaps find it less easy to talk about emotions with their children?
Definitely. And it is, you know, I mean, I'm being very generalized here, but the families that tend to come to me, if we're looking at how they were raised, and I'm putting myself in this bucket as well, like we're coming, you know, parenting has changed over the generations, massively so. We're moving from that space where it was a strict authoritarian style of parenting, very fear-based, very fear-led, to this other extreme that I sometimes see now, you know, whether you want to call it gentle parenting or whatever that is. But and always in the confusion is, okay, but now what do I do? And I don't want to say one thing, and I don't want to say no, and actually, you know, it's, I think what I, for me personally, what I focus on is how can we parent and raise our children, whether you're a teacher, you know, you don't have to be a parent, but whether you're working with children, how can we raise our children from a space of empathy and compassion versus from a space of fear? And the challenge, yes, with many of the parents that I support is they do come from more of that fear-based, and not because, you know, their parents love them and it's, you know, our parents only did, I just want to say, parents only did the best that they could do with the knowledge that they had, right? And nobody is a perfect parent, and we're never going to get this right 100% because that's just unrealistic. But coming from that background, it's a real challenge. And that's what I've, you know, often say to parents, it's who taught you to regulate your emotions? Or how were you taught to regulate your emotions? Who taught you to really sit with a difficult feeling and not fix it? Who taught you about your thoughts? And it's not because our parents didn't love us, but they didn't have the skills. because it was probably suppressed or denied, or they were not feeling safe. You know, they didn't feel safe to show those emotions. So we are trying to teach our children skills when it comes to emotional regulation, when it comes to talking about their feelings, but many adults haven't had that. And, you know, make a bold statement, but just look at the world today, put on the news, and it's a very clear sign that a lot of grown-ups do not know how to deal with difficult feelings. And we're sitting in a mental health pandemic. And so it's because we've never just been taught how to work through them in a healthy way. So it very much is, I think, you know, take that pressure off ourselves of, oh, I've got to get it all right for my child. Children now, if they get access to this, they're really going to be miles, you know, they're going to have so much more at their disposal when they're our age. But equally, you've got to have compassion for yourself of, you know, I did the wrong, you know, I quote unquote didn't do the right thing there. I could have dealt with that in a different way. But then the beauty is, okay, I can go back and repair. Because that's the other thing. How many of us have had our parents apologize to us when we were little, like, you know, telling you what, you know, I mean, maybe it happened, but Jen or teachers apologizing, I mean, that's never happened in my, you know, my experience. The power of the apology. And you know what, I'm really sorry. I got really angry then. I got shouty and I got so upset that I didn't even think of what was going on for you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have shouted like that. Help me understand. I mean, it might feel really counterintuitive, but you're teaching your child how to own what they've done. You're also teaching them how to repair, and you're teaching them that it's safe to sit with this uncomfortable feeling of being vulnerable and whatever else those uncomfortable feelings might be. So it's that's what I'm saying. It's like the hardest job you're ever going to do, because there's no qualification for it.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Do you have any other like successful strategies that you've seen parents do to really support their child's emotional well-being?
I think one of the key things is, how do we communicate with our children? And, you know, often there's this, you know, because now we're coming from this, but I don't want to parent my child the way I was parented. I want to give them a voice. I want to let them speak up. But then the flip side is, okay, but then there's no boundaries, because now, and also the guilt that comes onto that, because we briefly spoke about parent guilt. Maybe there's guilt because I'm not spending enough time with my children because I'm working, and therefore the boundaries are a bit relaxed. And it's hard holding boundaries, because you're on the receiving end of all those big blowouts and you just don't have the energy for it. But I think what is really important is that boundaries are key for children, because without boundaries, they don't feel safe. And actually, it can be quite anxiety provoking if there are no boundaries there, because you always feel like you're on eggshells. So whilst children might tell you they want to be in power, they really don't, because it's scary. They're looking to you to be that person in control. But the challenge is, how can we hold boundaries from a space of empathy and compassion versus fear? And that's the real challenge. And so communicating with our children, which will feel, you know, does feel counterintuitive, because the natural tendency is, do as I say because I said so, or, you know, just fix this problem, or it's not so bad, don't worry, don't cry about it, especially because to your rational mind, it's not a big deal if they're having a meltdown about, say, not being able to drink from their favorite blue cup, right? And the red cup's right there. But it is about the first, like, I think one of the key things we can do, and this is communication with all people in our lives, is really taking some time to connect with the emotional experience that that person is having. Of like, do you know what, Toby, I get it. I get this is hard. I know I'm being super annoying because I'm telling you to do your homework again. I get it. I get it. And it's just so boring. You know, this is really tough. Taking just some time to just meet them in that feeling, which you will not want to do, which feels so counterintuitive. It doesn't feel right. But when we can meet them in that space, then we're meeting them in that emotion that they're having. And then that, you know, that starts to calm the defenses. It's the same as if, you know, you've come to me, you're really upset, and I'm like, oh, just calm down. It's not a big deal. I mean, it never makes us calm, right? Because we don't feel validated. We don't feel seen, heard, or understood. So taking that initial time, and that comes up with anxiety, that comes with anger. It's because, again, you know, with anxiety, we want to fix it. We don't want to see our children struggling. but actually like, do you know what, that sounds like it's really big, that sounds like there's a lot of big feelings here, tell me a bit more, or it must feel really overwhelming that that's happened to you, help me understand. And again, when we do that, it just doesn't take the challenge away, but it just kind of brings things down a little bit. But that is a real skill, you know, and it's practice. But you know, that's not just beneficial for kids, that's, think of your partners, you know, work colleagues, how often we get caught up in arguments, but actually if we just take some time to connect to that feeling, it lowers those defenses. Yeah,
it is interesting. I always try with my daughter Paloma. I mean, she's just about to turn 2, but whenever she's having a tantrum over, you know, I grabbed her lion instead of her cat, or like your analogy of passing the wrong cup. I always try and say, like, I know this is difficult for you. I could see it's challenging to regulate your emotions. My husband's always like, "What are you talking?" And he just kind of like leaves her to it a little bit. And I'm like, no, I really want you to follow this. And I think he finds it quite strange. And sometimes when I'm down there, I don't know what to say either, because part of me wants to laugh and part of me wants to cry because you're in the middle of a supermarket.
And that's the challenge though, right? But I take it one step further there, when you do meet her in that, in like, oh, I know I took the lion, I didn't take the tiger, oh, I'm so silly for doing that, or mommy's so annoying for doing that. Like I always say, like, try and meet her on her radio frequency level with where she's at, versus, because sometimes we can go into that, like, oh, it must be really hard for you, I know. Like that customer service response, and you're like, you have no, do you know what I mean? So it really,
Yeah,
like, we're just taking some time to you know, mirror back that emotion and that feeling that she's feeling. And yeah, I appreciate it's not always in the most convenient of spaces that these things are going to take place. Now, obviously, there are things that you can do outside of those moments to help and scaffold a bit more, because it's not just what we do in the moments, but what's taking place, you know, outside of those moments. And I would say, and this is a real challenge. I don't think there's going to be any parent that's going to be like, bring on a public meltdown, bring it on, I don't care. Like it's going to be uncomfortable. But the reality is, you know, you have to do what you feel is right for you and your child, versus what, you know, 10 other people around you might be thinking. And hopefully there are more compassionate mums around you or dads around you. Like whenever I go to the supermarket, you know, now I always feel really sorry for the poor mum or poor dad whose kids are having a meltdown, because it's really hard. Or on the, you know what I mean? And it's just, I just think like that yes, that fear of judgment might be there. Actually, I don't know. Depends how much bandwidth you've got. Yeah, I'm tongue in cheek. Get out of the floor with her. Be like, do you know what? I hear you. It's okay. Let it out. You know, it's gonna be a bit of a seed. We're all right. I mean, you know, I'm not saying do that, but yeah, it's not easy at all.
Yeah, I'm quick to try and prevent as well. I'm not sure about you, Heidi, but I'm like, if she's asked for something and I can hear it in her voice that it's escalating, and Aaron's just like sat there, or like, I mean, he's very hands-on, but I'll be like, like screaming from downstairs, pass her the lion. She's just 5 steps from you.
I normally just remove her. We're in a different room, let her calm down for a little while. But that really is fascinating. I feel like I've got so much homework to do, and I'm going to be listening back to this podcast like over and over again. I really will be. Have you got any other advice for, you know, parents that could be really struggling right now and just don't know where to turn?
Yeah, I mean, golly, yeah, there's lots of areas. I think, do you know what? It might sound a bit counterintuitive, but one of the first things that came to mind when you said that is, I don't think there's, like, as parents and caregivers, you know, practicing self-compassion is something that kind of falls off the wayside. I think that, you know, from the conversations I have with a lot of parents, there's a lot of you know, guilt, shame, or blame, or you know, where am I going wrong with this? I could be doing more. And I think being really mindful of your own internal chatter and that own narrative that you're running. And I often encourage parents to keep an evidence list at the end of the day, like just what, so even if you had a massive, flip out with your child and you shouted at them and they shouted back at you, and then afterwards we go into the whole guilt spiral, at the end of the day, still fine. First of all, at the end of the day, just hold space for your own feelings there. Do you know what? That was really tough today. And no wonder I found it hard, because I'm learning to regulate my emotions as well. And this stuff is tough because it's hitting a lot of vulnerable things within me, and if often I encourage parents sometimes to dig a bit deeper. What was it like for you as a child? Were you allowed to speak up, to back chat, to what were your experiences like? And what is it that little boy or little girl needed from their caregivers? And most, I'm not saying all the time, but many of the times it goes back to that we just wanted to feel seen, heard, and understood. So coming back to now, have compassion for yourself of, do you know what? I could have dealt with that better. I know that my child is actually still struggling and they're needing to build the skills. But no wonder this is hard for me, because I'm learning these skills as well. So I'm trying to do it for two people, for me and for my child. Because I think if we can start to exercise more compassion to ourselves, it doesn't take the challenges away, but it does shift how you then approach those challenges with more empathy and compassion. So I'd say, and going back to the evidence list being, even, if you think it was a really rubbish day, pick one or two things that you did that day that you did well in, that prove that you are a good mom, that you are a good dad, because you are. If you're listening to this podcast, you absolutely are, because you're wanting to learn. No matter how small that is, because we forget as well. I think, we can be our own worst critics, and those thoughts that we have influences how I feel, influences how I behave. And so we get caught up in this little cycle. And so really becoming aware of that, and, advocate for yourself. Do you know what? I should have done that differently. Okay, tomorrow. And, I often talk about planning ahead. Tomorrow, I know we're going to have this challenge again. Okay, how can I go in as just a 1% better version of myself? I'm going to regulate my emotions. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to remind myself, if I have to, one of my clients said to me, I visualize my son walking around with half a brain, kind of like a piece, like a chunk missing. So she's like, I just visualize that. And that keeps me just grounded and regulated, not calm, because like we often say stay calm, but calm kind of gives you the impression of going to be zen, like I don't have any of these uncomfortable feelings. You're going to feel all of those like horrible feelings, but you're staying regulated. And that in itself is a skill. So I think if it's anything, if you're struggling, first look at, it sounds cheesy, but it's putting your own oxygen mask on. Okay, let me look at my own self-regulatory skills. I know I want my son to learn them, but if I'm just regulated, he's not going to stay calm. So what am I doing, or little things then that you could do, with other families. There's been like just a little things that made a difference. With the dad I was working with, is he said, he didn't realize the difference it was in terms of taking just a walk out around the lake with the pushchair and the pram to meet his friend. Like they do that a couple of times a week. He's like, on the days that he didn't do it, or there was a week gone by, I think it was during COVID. So his wife had COVID, and, and so forth. And he's like, that week was awful. But actually, when I was able to get out, it made such a difference. Because often, you put yourself on the bottom of the list because everybody else is important. All these things to be done. And the challenge is, no, it's not me first and them second. It's actually me as well. So the two of us together. And what's that? And even if it's one small thing that you can do that day to kind of fill up your cup, because you only have so much energy to give in any given day. And if your energy is depleted, that has such a ripple effect on everybody else around you. And, I think that's, if anything, because that's going to make you more resilient, it's going to make you more tolerant, it's going to make you more patient. And, a great phrase that I heard that a friend of mine said is, what does my best look or feel like today? And I think that that's important, because your best day, your energy tank might be at 40% today. And yesterday it was at 80%. Okay, but today, what does the 40% look like? And that's okay. Yeah, so there's been lots there.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. And I have a gratitude list that I write out every night before I go to bed, about, you know, how my day was blessed, and look at the positive things. So actually, it's interesting that I don't focus on my parenting. So actually, I should pull out one or two positive things that I did that day
Yeah.
that was really positive in my parenting, and I think that would really help me. I
And
think.
I'd even go as far to say, even if you did flip your lid, right? I often talk about flip, you know, taking Dr. Daniel Siegel, often talk about flipping our lid. Even if you did flip your lid, but you were able to hold on a bit longer, that's still a win in my books, right? And maybe then I apologized, or I've now, do you know what? I flipped my lid. Tomorrow I'm going to make a point to actually repair that. I'm going to go back to my daughter. I'm going to talk about that, because I think that's often something that we miss on a real connected opportunity there. Sorry, I'm kind of digressing here, but you know, there is always an opportunity for a do-over. So even if you had a big blowout a couple of months ago and it's still on your mind, nothing stops you from bringing that up now. And actually, it's really important that we do, because it helps children make sense of the story within their mind. It also, when we can take some time to talk about what those feelings were, you know, what was happening for you, this was happening for me. And look, even though that happened wasn't good, here we are, you know, we're working through it. So it's helping them to structure that and work through those big feelings, even though it's not in the moment. You know, so, but yeah, going back, yeah, definitely going back to the pin, like that evidence-less care. What am I doing? Little things.
And how can we get children to talk about their emotions? How do we get them to identify their emotions? I've got these mood cards. What's your advice on how to use them?
I mean, I like prompts. I often with kids, something like mood cards, to be fair, I've not actually had a pack of mood cards. I don't quite know. Is it just that they've got different emotions on them?
And they just explain the emotions.
I mean, what I would do is I'd bring myself into this. So, because often children, especially children that might not want to talk about their feelings, and just because they don't want to talk about it, it's kind of like teenagers. You know, teenagers can sometimes like, you know, and I've delivered sessions to them, I'm like, they did not take anything in and they were not interested. But then I hear later on, actually, they've applied all the tools. I'm like, oh, so you were listening to what I was saying, right? And I remember this at school as well as a teacher. So I would say, make it about you. I mean, or, you know, if you've got storybooks that you read with kids, there's a really good book, I think it's called Visiting Feelings, or Feeling Visitors, and it really is, like, it's just a storybook about just different feelings and what color they are, like, and, you know, describes them. There's also another good one called Emotionary, so that is for slightly older children, and it's got beautiful pictures and then a description of the emotion. So, or the cards, choosing one. And, or even at the end of the day, just, you know, maybe you're helping her pack up, or you're just having a moment together, and you've got the content and you flick through them very, like, you know, casually, and she'll be like, oh, I think I noticed this feeling today. Yeah, I was at the shops and this person maybe said this to me, and I noticed, you know, maybe this person said a kind word to me and I actually noticed this feeling of joy. And actually, if I think about it now, I was feeling this feeling in my chest. I mean, you know, you're kind of modeling a bit to her. I normally start off with, you know, where do you feel the feelings in your body? And, or, you know, maybe something had happened, you're like, you know, I felt really frustrated today. And I could really feel the frustration build up in my body. So, and then maybe open up the opportunity to her. But I would say bringing those emotions in and directing it to you first, or even if she hears you and your partner speak, you know, or other people. And I often say to parents, sometimes it feels a bit of role play, but let children overhear you talk using some of these tools. Well, do you know what, today I had a really tough day and I felt so overwhelmed, and, you know, my boss was saying this and this person was saying this, and I could feel myself. But then I just use that breathing strategy that I've been learning. So get your children to hear you say these things and do these things. So that would be my, you know, my advice, to maybe turn it on you first. Other options as well, you know, often I help kids explore what are the feelings that hide under my angry mask, because anger is that secondary emotion, and we've got those more like vulnerable feelings underneath, such as fear, worry, disappointment, you know, loneliness, jealousy. So often I say, like, when they're watching stories or reading books and the character gets angry, director, what do you think might be under his angry mask? What do you think he might be feeling? And that's another way to kind of open up that conversation.
So helpful. Thank you. I think the biggest thing for me from this conversation is about the compassion, but just in any other aspect of my life, I just have a continuous feedback loop and want to improve and, looking for ways. But when it comes to parenting, I want to do that, but I just internalize it all and don't have the same compassion and seek feedback and, apologize. And it's really powerful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And one of the things I will say is your child's job is to press your buttons and, like, in terms of pushing the boundaries, right? And they will be upset with you. You're not going to make them happy all the time. And that's not a reflection on you as the parent or that you're doing anything wrong, because they do have big feelings because they're learning how to express these feelings. It's their brain, that emotional hub of the brain is far more advanced and developed than the logical, rational thinking part. And they don't have those skills to regulate. So we can very easily take it quite personally and think, oh my gosh, they hate me and they just prefer my husband, they don't prefer me, and like I'm the worst mom, and they say they don't want to be here, like all these horrible things that kids say. But that's always a sign that they are feeling, misunderstood and alone and overwhelmed in their big feelings. And they don't have the skills to help them. And it's not about me or my parenting or, that I'm a bad mum or a bad dad.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie, I think after this conversation, all our listeners are going to want to find you and speak to you and get more insights from you. How can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So obviously on LinkedIn, Natalie Costa, my website as well, powerthoughts.co.uk. I'm also active on Instagram. So my handle there is at powerthoughts, N for Natalie, C for Costa. So powerthoughts NC. So yeah, all of those good places online.
Thank you. And I know, Heidi, you'll want to close this off as well. It's just been an incredible conversation. I've taken loads from it personally. And I know our listeners will as well. So thank you so much. And Heidi.
There's so much to think about, just so helpful. Yeah, I have a lot of homework to do and I'm going to be listening back to this podcast I don't know how many times, but yeah, it's been really, really helpful. And I'm really inspired by you, Natalie, and everything that you've taught us today. It's really powerful. And I think a lot of parents are going to benefit from this podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you for having me.
Okay, so on this episode, we are joined by Dora from Mama Academy and Alicia from Thrive Law. Please, can you introduce yourselves, ladies? Dora, let's start with you.
Hi, so my name is Dora. I joined Mama Academy in 2022. I actually joined right after I had a baby, and I actually soon became pregnant again. And I look after all of our fundraisers and our supporters in general. So yes, I've been with the charity for a year and a half, nearly 2 years now, and I really enjoy my role.
So my name's Alicia Collinson. I'm a senior associate at Thrive Law. So Thrive is a small employment law firm. We're based up in Leeds, and we kind of do a variety of lots of different kinds of law. So we support employers and employees. We do a lot of special focus in mental health, neurodiversity, and just general wellbeing support on the part of employers. But for my part, I do a lot of the individual employee support. And I do a lot of our charitable partnerships. And I'm a mum myself, so I have a 20-month-old. And I'm really passionate about kind of maternity, pregnancy, and general kind of female support in the workplace, because I feel like even just when I started doing employment law 5 years ago, the whole landscape looks so different even just now. So it's really, I just think it's really important to be a part of that and continue to perpetuate it.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Alicia, and we're so grateful for all of your support at the moment. So how did Thrive Law actually come about? How did you get involved with it?
So Thrive Law was founded by Jodie Hill, who has like innumerous amounts of Instagram followers, and she was a barrister and then qualified as a solicitor. She's been diagnosed with ADHD more recently, but was undiagnosed at the time and had well, it was a mental breakdown at the time, but she now calls it her mental breakthrough, and kind of formed Thrive off the back of identifying what other law firms weren't doing, both in terms of what we do for supporting internally, but also encouraging other employers to do. And so that's kind of what Thrive was born as an employment law firm that's just different and actually puts people and thinks about the employees. And I joined, weirdly enough, because my mum saw Jodie on the local news and was like, I think you would really like her. And I was looking to move at the time. I lived down in London and I desperately wanted to move back up north and find a job that would suit me. And I emailed Jodie being like, I don't suppose you ever want to like have a chat about a position. And she was like, oh, come for an interview. So that's kind of how I joined Thrive. I just had never seen anything like it in terms of the value, like just being so values driven. And I think since then, that was back in 2018. Since then, I think a lot more companies have become really aware of like values and what they stand for and how that's perceived. But back then, especially for law firms, if anyone had a wellbeing initiative, it was much more of a we've cut apples in the kitchen now, so you eat more fruit kind of thing, as opposed to actually things that genuinely help. So yeah, that's who we are and kind of how I joined, at least.
Amazing. And what was just to dig a little bit deeper on that, what was the trigger for you to, I guess, find an organisation that's more aligned to your purpose and values?
So I trained down in London, and what they say about some law firms is true. The hours were intense. I didn't have any time to kind of do any of my self-care. I just completely burnt out. So I suffer quite well. I was diagnosed with PTSD after my dad died in 2015. And I've suffered really badly with anxiety, both pre and post that. And it just wasn't the right environment for me to actually be like any good at anything. I just failed at every turn. I wasn't a very good lawyer. I wasn't a very good wife or partner, then wife. And I just kind of had this moment where I just thought, if you spend most of your time at work, it should be somewhere that makes you feel happy and brings you like joy and gives you a purpose and you want to do it. So that was why I kind of decided that I wanted to move back and think about where my life, because everyone's different, but for me, I just felt like my life was kind of in limbo for the longer I was in London, and I just thought something's got to give. And it was that, to be more precise, it was actually one more day on a train and a tube that had broken down, and I'm very short, and I had my head in someone's armpit, and I just thought, there has to be some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and it's like the end of this tube tunnel. So I just like had to start reevaluating. So yeah, that's.
I get that. This can't possibly be it. Me stood inside this person's armpit on the sweaty London tube, which is pretty horrific.
Yeah,
it's interesting though, because I think lots of people can go through. Sometimes it takes getting to rock bottom for you to actually realise what's important to you and do work that's more purposeful, which is, similar happened to me. And I know, Heidi, your story has caused you to create and find Mama Academy as well. So it's amazing what it can inspire. If we, in terms of, I guess we're interested to hear about some common themes, and Dora, perhaps you can give some flavour here as well, just on parents returning to work after maternity leave. I'd be interesting to hear what sort of stuff you hear coming up.
It's interesting because I think there's this default approach where our employer clients are quite defensive, not defensive, but like really wanting to be like everything we need to know. And the same for employees, they kind of want to prove themselves and come at it really kind of like with a lot. And there's a kind of a little bit of an us versus them kind of mindset towards it. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think it can be much more collaborative when you're coming back. Obviously, we have often issues with flexible working requests and how they're received, what they look like, whether or not they're accepted or rejected. And again, I think that's something else that can come across that can be quite adversarial from both how the employer deals with it, but also in terms of if an employee assumes it's going to be rejected, you can come at it from quite a defensive way. I always say to my employee clients when they're kind of putting in flexible working requests, they either are like, it's definitely going to be rejected, so I need to be starting to look at something else, or, oh, well, I'll just, if they reject it, or I'll start thinking maybe I could just work full time anyway and kind of adjust their expectations. And actually, I always kind of come back to, well, it is your right. So let's start from, it is your right to make this request, and it is your right to not be put to a detriment because you have made that request. So start by kind of standing in your own responsibility and understanding that this is something that you can and should do, and that technically it can't just be rejected. They have to explain why, and they have to fit it within a legal framework that exists so that you can exercise your right to have your flexible working. So I kind of always come back to that. But I think people can be quite defensive on return, and kind of everything can feel a little bit, you want to come, if they've had enough support in a maternity leave, it depends what their experience was with before, but if they felt very like out of the loop and then suddenly they're coming back, the behavior is very different, as opposed to if they, before they left, they felt really supported, they've had continued communication if that's what they've wanted, they've had kit days, and they have that kind of ongoing support. The way they feel about the return can be very different. The other really common one we're getting at the moment is working from home and childcare, and if it's possible to do both. And we have no case law on it. The obvious answer appears to be you probably can't do both, but it is interesting because there's a lot of nuance to that argument in terms of why employers say you can't do both. So I've seen employers try to run arguments like, well, your child could be a distraction, but their answer is, well, you know, Sally's got a dog and the dog's really distracting, so what's the difference? And it actually is, it's really, and there's not very clear guidance on it at the moment. It's very much an employer on employer basis, but yeah, so that's quite interesting as well at the moment.
And how else can employers support colleagues that are either expecting, they've just found out they're pregnant, or may have young children as well that they've got to look after?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the support kind of when you're expecting, I think, again, really communication is key. And I think there's two different reasons why employers do things. They either do it because they have to, so it's their obligation, or they do it because they recognize that it's the right thing to do and they want their employees to be happy and healthy. Now, I would prefer everyone to do things for that second reason, and they would be very, very supportive and communicative and do things because it is the right thing to do. But also they need to bear in mind that legally they are obliged to request MAT1B forms, talk through what their statutory maternity dates are going to look like, make it clear that kit days are available. They don't seem to be doing that at the moment, and then mothers are turning around and being like, oh, I would have had an opportunity to top up SMP during this cost of living crisis, but no one ever really made that clear what that would look like. So I think it's all about communication and support, isn't it? And you can choose how much you can go for bare minimum, which is the legal bare minimum of what you have to do, or you can really provide further support, things like coaching, or just even little things like, what does your notification form look like? Does your notification form just say, what day is your baby coming? What do you want to do? When do you want to come back? And is it really, or does it have other information like, how do you want us to contact you? Do you want us to throw your baby shower or not? Do you want us to think about, do you want us to send you cards? Do you want to come visit? Do you want to bring the baby? And just trying to make it, think about things that are actually genuinely going to affect that individual rather than just your employee. And if you invest in them before they go, in all likelihood, they will come back and pay that back in dividends, because people remember how you made them feel. And I think in terms of new parents, I mean, it's all about, insofar as industry allows, being mindful of flexibility, being mindful that people have new pressures that they maybe they underestimated and didn't realize what they were going to be like before. Like Thrive's a really good example, because I only came back in January, and I so much thought I would just be like the same person who left, and I'm not. The way my brain thinks is very, very different. In a lot of ways, I'm probably better with the individuals because I'm a lot more empathetic, but I struggle to concentrate a little bit more. I had absolutely ages where I said to Jodie, I was like, I actually just think I'm failing because I can't do things at the same pace that I was doing them before. And trying to be mindful of what are you expecting when people come back, because you struggle when you've had 2 weeks off for holiday. So imagine when you've had a year off and you've had, in some cases, the most traumatic thing that's ever going to happen to your body happen, plus all the upheaval that goes with breastfeeding or sleepless nights or behavioural concerns, or is she meant to be walking yet because she's not, whatever it may be. Your brain is just in a completely different place. So I think employers will and do well to remember that and think about, are there adaptations we can put into place? Are there coaching, and can we do something for your confidence? If you're a really big employer, putting together like new parent networks is brilliant, because you're giving people the platform to talk about it with each other and say, do you ever think about this? So yeah, there's lots of things that can be done, and lots of people coming up with really great ways to do it as well.
That's really interesting, actually. I was just thinking about you, Dora, as well, because I remember when you went on maternity leave, I was trying not to get you to rush any decisions, because I was thinking once you actually have your baby, things will be completely different, because then you'll have 2 children to look after and life will seem so much different. So tell us about your experience, Dora, because I'd really like to hear it from your point of view.
So what I can say is, like you, I also struggle with anxiety and depression, and I have 2 children. And when you have children, I mean, being an anxious person, especially when you're pregnant, especially having high-risk pregnancies, it's a very worrying time. And you get anxious, and you do worry about your baby. So I think ultimately, from an employee and an employer perspective, a mom or an expectant parent should be able to focus on not worrying about their job, but looking after themselves, looking after their body. And I think expectant parents and moms are more than capable of doing an amazing job, an incredible job whilst they are pregnant, as long as they are looked after and they are supported. And what I can say is, from experience, when I had my first child, I didn't feel comfortable discussing my anxiety and my depression with my employer, which I think adds pressure, because I felt anxious anyway, and I was pregnant and COVID hit, so there was layers and layers and layers of anxiety, and I also had a high-risk pregnancy, so I think because of that, whilst I was pregnant, I was struggling. Going on maternity leave, I was struggling. I wasn't quite sure how to communicate my expectations whilst, I was on maternity leave with my employer and so on and so forth. And I was just worried because there is a lot of negative feedback from other moms. A lot of moms talk about the discrimination that they face whilst they are pregnant, during pregnancy, whilst they are on maternity leave, and so on. So in my first pregnancy, I really struggled, but I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't have that relationship with my employer to discuss my anxiety and my depression and my struggles. And I actually have changed jobs after I had my first baby, after I returned from maternity leave, and I joined Mama Academy in January. I started in January 2022. And what I can say is, very shortly afterwards, I found out I was pregnant. And I think we all agree that starting a new job and finding out you're pregnant, I was really concerned and I was really worried, especially because I work for a very small organization, but I had so much faith in the organization and in what we do. and in Heidi and in the course that I actually discussed my pregnancy with Heidi very early on. And I remember, and I think as moms, I think we all sort of sympathize when you break the news, to your employer that, hey, I'm pregnant, especially if you join the charity 6 weeks earlier, you're going to be like, oh gosh, how is she going to react? What's she going to say? Like, I haven't even, like, I only just started my probationary period. And, you know, whilst you are trying your best, you want to be able to do your best. You want to be able to focus on your job. You don't want to worry about whether, because something happened in your personal life, you're going to lose your job, or whether they're going to not renew your contract, or they say, oh, actually, you didn't complete your probationary period, we are not really happy with you, because all of these are very rare possibilities. And I remember, I think I probably was around 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. And again, going back to my own mental health struggles, I'm really anxious. So I couldn't cope, and I just called Heidi, and I still remember the conversation. I called Heidi, and I was fully expecting her to say, oh my gosh, like, you just started with us. And I was worried about her reaction. And I remember I called her and I said, look, Heidi, you know, I'm pregnant. I just found out. It is a big surprise for me, but I'm really excited. And I just want to be honest with you. And I remember her saying, oh my God, Dora, I'm really pleased that you told me this. And I was like, okay, what's next? And she was like, I'm really pleased because now I know how I can support you. Because I know you told me that you had a high risk pregnancy before, and I know how to support you now to make sure that this time around you are supported and you can focus on, you know, having a healthy mental being. You feel calm, and that you can focus on your job. You don't need to worry about your job security, or you don't need to worry about, you know, needing to go to maternity appointments. It was a completely different experience. And part of it is probably communication, but part of it is, and a huge part of it is, working for an organization who, you know, they wanted to look after me as an expectant mom. And I think Heidi proved, and this organization proved, that you don't need to be a big company and a big charity or a bigger organization to treat somebody right, because Mama Academy is tiny. And I think, I'm fairly sure I was the very first employer who ever been pregnant at Mama Academy. But you know, Heidi, I put her on the spot. She never had a pregnant employee before. I put her on the spot because I just called her. I didn't send her an email. I didn't pre-warn her. I was just like, hey, Heidi, I hope you're doing well. I'm pregnant. And she just treated me with so much respect and kindness. And I really hope that afterwards, during my pregnancy, I did my best to work for her as hard as I could and, you know, achieve certain things, because I wanted to prove her that, you know, if you treat people with respect and if you treat expectant parents well, it will pay dividends, and you're going to get that back. And throughout my maternity leave, I didn't have the concern of whether I need to return to work, whether I want to return to work, whether I'm going to get the same position back, or whether Heidi going to change my contract, or you know, all the worries again that expectant parents have, because I trusted Heidi.
Yeah.
And we had that relationship where I trusted her, that I knew I have a job to come back to. I can focus on my baby. I can focus on enjoying my pregnancy and my maternity. And when I come back, you know, I can start again.
I think the point you made about SMEs is really interesting, like small companies is really interesting, because actually a lot of the small companies we deal with are really keen to support, but they've never had it before. They actually fundamentally don't know what they're meant to do. So we have clients who are as in the same way, who are like, oh, she told us we're pregnant, we really want to help her, but we don't know, we literally just do not know what we're meant to do. So I think one thing that I would say is, and it sounds like you guys are really nailing it as well, is like having that open culture to the way people feel like they can talk about it at any point. Because I mean, when you're really early pregnant, you're also more likely to be really unwell and be like actually just absolutely shattered and sick, and heaven knows. And actually, a lot of people don't tell their employer, because obviously there's the 12-week point where people are more likely to communicate anyway. But you know, you're probably going to take more sickness absence, and you feel you're in this weird point where you're like, I'm sick, but I can't say why, even though it is protected because it's related to pregnancy, but I don't know how to communicate that. So having that culture where people feel like you can say it earlier and then people feel a lot more like almost rip the band-aid off, that's done now. And then you feel more empowered in that knowledge. Something else when you work for small businesses, and I always say, is we kind of trying to work together, because it's new to everyone. You're having a new baby, a small company maybe doesn't know what to do. So trying to kind of put together and be like, well, this is everything I think I need to do. This is everything that maybe you can do and I've thought of, and trying to kind of collaborate on it, because people do want to support you. And if you say, these are the things that I think would maybe help, or these are the things that I think you need to do, they'll be really grateful for that, because it is difficult. It is hard to try and figure out what that looks like and make sure you're doing completely the right thing. And it is a bit of a minefield for some people. So I think that's a really good point as well.
What advice would you give, Alicia, to parents that need to tell their employee that they're pregnant and what their maternity plans are?
Well, I think it's so much about remembering that you haven't done anything wrong. It's amazing how guilty we feel still. Like, I absolutely adore my work. And I remember when I told Jodie I was pregnant, I remember saying, I'm really sorry. And I just thought, like, why am I? She was like, why are you sorry? That's amazing. You've been trying for ages. This is fab. But you just have this kind of, we feel so much association, so much, especially if we like our job, so much kind of association with that. So the first point is, don't feel guilty. You've done nothing wrong. And you are in kind of, I don't want to call it the position of power, but you are protected. So you should, although you do feel vulnerable from a whole lot of different ways, you should be bearing in mind that you are now protected. Someone can't turn around. Doesn't mean people don't, but they can't turn around and say, oh, well, okay, you're fired.
I was just wondering what parents can do if they feel discriminated. What should they do? Are there any time limits?
Yes. So time limits are, so effectively, when we talk about parents, we need to be focusing on, let's start out with mothers, or at least the person who is having the baby, because they're protected under maternity and pregnancy, like the protected characteristic of maternity and pregnancy. Now, there's a whole bunch of thing about the protected period from which they're protected from redundancy, but it's slightly different and nuanced, and it only applies in redundancy. Protection from maternity and pregnancy is literally from the second you tell them you're pregnant, or they suspect that you might be, all the way up to kind of when you come back, and things associated with breastfeeding or whatever it may be. And you're entitled to not be directly discriminated or indirectly discriminated against because of that. Now, if they feel that, so let's say in an absolute worst case scenario, you tell Bob, I'm pregnant, and Bob says, oh, okay, well, you are fired, which I haven't seen in those exact terms, but I've seen very, very close to. You would then have 3 months. That would be your act of discrimination. You have to do something about it within 3 months. And it's a whole, there are campaigns to extend this 3 months time limit, but you have 3 months from the last act of discrimination to go to ACAS, which is the start of escalating any dispute. If you miss your time limits, they can't hear it. And it is literally as simple as that. There is such little time. There's so little examples of when they will extend it. So even if your discrimination is, let's say, whilst you're on maternity leave. So let's say while you're on maternity leave, you find out that someone's they're planning on not having you return. They've replaced you full time. They've told everyone at work that you're not coming back, even if you've not agreed from that. That conversation is probably going to be the act of discrimination, and you're going to want to make sure that it's in time. So even if you're on maternity leave, you probably have about 3 months in which you will have 3 months in which you want to make sure that you're escalating that through ACAS or getting legal advice to make sure you're doing that. It's one of the things that really frustrates me about the legal system, because that is not a long time for women who have just had a baby or are trying to balance everything else. And it really should be longer for that specific example, because let's face it, they're already juggling a whole load of plates. Why are you adding litigation to it? But that is the main thing. It's something to absolutely be mindful of, is that if you are the victim of discrimination, if you're dismissed, then you've got 3 months from your dismissal date. If you're the victim but you're still there, raise a grievance, do whatever you need to do, but put something in your diary for that 3 months date, wherever it needs to be, and go to ACAS when you get to that date if it's not resolved.
It's mad, isn't it? Because I had something similar happen to me, and I live in a different country anyway, but there was this whole like cross jurisdiction thing of whether I could argue in the UK courts. And to be honest, it was just all so complicated that I gave up because of that 3 months. You know, I had postnatal depression and was just like trying to get through the days, you know, so it's impossible to take that route for a lot of people. You have to be pretty strong if it's immediately after you've had a baby to charge forward with that.
Yeah, and we have so many people who like come back from maternity leave and are then made redundant, or they're made so they never really go back, and then they take all their holiday and they get a new job because they need a new job because they have to figure out how to get their earnings, and they get all of those ducks in a row, which is completely fair enough. And then they come to us and they're like, oh, you know, all these things happened, these are all the awful things they said, and we're like, it's definitely discrimination, but you've missed your window. And that's really difficult because then there's no repercussions and there's no justice in that, is there really?
Yeah, hopefully it changes. I know there's lots of campaigning going on, so hopefully that does work. Dora, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask a question because I know that the flexible working breakfast, employers have 3 months to actually reply to that.
Yeah.
So if you are being discriminated against,
yeah,
and you make a flexible working breakfast,
yeah,
and your employer takes their time and takes 3 months to reply,
yeah,
where is the end point? Where is the
So-
point where, okay, you know, it's too late to go to ACAS?
yeah, so it's technically 3 months from the last act. So if something kind of reignites it, so let's say they then rejected your flexible working request, which is not in of itself discriminatory, so that's why I would be cautious anyway. But if they, let's say, they then denied it because they said, well, you know, you've got children, we don't want anyone who has children to look after, that's blatantly discriminatory because of sex, that's a new act. Now, if they're all linked and you can say they're done by the same person, they're part of a series of acts, then the last one, as long as the last one is in time, then the rest of them can come in. But it's just something to be mindful of because employers are savvy and they know how to push you out. So like most commonly with dismissals, so if someone is dismissed and you appeal that dismissal, employers will quite often then deliberately take more than 3 months to have the outcome of your appeal of your dismissal. But you're timed out then because it's not from the date of that outcome, it's from the date of your dismissal. So and they know that they're not dumb. They know they know where they're at with that. So it's just things like that to be mindful of. So if you are dismissed, you can't. It's not in your interest to wait and see if they reinstate. You can always take it back. It's free. So you can always put something in, and then if it resolves itself, you just withdraw it. There's no consequences to that, and that's much stronger for you than it would be to wait and then let them kind of get away with it almost.
I'm also wondering, Alicia, what the current maternity rights are for bereaved parents as well, parents that lose their baby, because obviously that was my first experience, and my employer was absolutely fantastic for me, I have to say. They let me take my time, they let me decide when I wanted to go back. They talked to me about how I would go back and what they wanted people to know and what not to know, etc. So what are the current maternity rights around bereavement leave?
So if you are more than 26 weeks pregnant, you are still entitled to your maternity leave, but you classed as a bereaved parent, so you're entitled to statutory parental bereavement leave, and so is the partner involved in that. So you get two, but it's 2 weeks and it's paid at a statutory rate. Now, a lot of employers enhance that and change that. But if you're over 26 weeks, you still also get you're still entitled, even if you sadly don't have a living baby, you're still entitled to maternity leave in any event. Lots of people don't take that full time because you know maybe they wouldn't want to, but you have that option open and available to you. If you're less than 26 weeks, then it would likely count as sickness absence, which is probably not sufficient, but that's the legal position. But there should, if your baby's born alive before 26 weeks, you still fall within the maternity piece. But obviously, if it's just a miscarriage, I say just, that's a horrible thing to say. If it is a miscarriage, then before 26 weeks, then it's just sickness absence. Now, as you say, a lot of people are very willing and want to enhance that and be very, very supportive. And I think that's great. But legally, yeah, it's just statutory bereavement and your maternity leave if you're past 26 weeks.
Again, I know there's lots of campaigning that's going on at the moment to try and change that, and it's changing all the time, which is great. But yeah, my employer was just so respectful and understanding, and they you know, it was all discretionary, but they gave me you know, full maternity rights, and it was up to me when I wanted to go back, etc. But I know that's a very personal decision.
Yeah, we've got a lot of like almost all of our employer clients are always looking for what they can do for stillbirth, parental leave, parental loss. A lot of employers, which I really respect, are tying in abortion to be equal to kind of equal kind of entitlements as well, and that's, I find that really, really respectful. And the question we tend to get from employers is, what's everyone else doing and what might people need? And I find that, because I think when we talk about pregnancy and we talk about and employment, we can kind of suddenly go like, oh, discrimination, and feel like it's really adversarial. But overwhelmingly, there are always going to be stories and negative things happening. But overwhelmingly, employers do want to do the right thing. And employers do recognise increasingly the value in supporting the women in their workplace.
Yeah, we've got some information actually on our website, which is about how to support a colleague coming back that's lost a baby, and also, you know, how you can support someone as a friend as well. So we have also got information there on the website for parents too.
Amazing.
Thank you. And I think final question, unless anyone's got anything to add, and we just touched on some of it then, but what are the positive changes you've seen happening, Alicia, recently?
I genuinely do feel, maybe it's because I work at Thrive now, and I used to have a different client base in London. I had a lot of American clients, and in America it's completely different. Like the entitlements are, we had an American client once who called and was like, well, it's based in our office in London, but how much leave does she get? And we were like, well, she gets 52 weeks. And he was like, what? Like, that's a whole year. What's she gonna do? I was like, raise her child. Like, that's so I think maybe it is slightly my exposure, but I do think generally employers are so engaged on the topic of well-being, and so engaged on what can we actually, they recognize so much more than they used to the value of supporting your employees, and the fact that happier and healthier employees will be better employees. And I think that applies also when we talk about support for pregnant women and, you know, seeing those changes. I think there's a lot more knowledge around and support for people who are perhaps having fertility issues, kind of recurrent miscarriages, whatever it may be. People are motivated by wanting to do the right thing. I also think it's very interesting because there's studies to do with different expectations of different generations, and as we start to see kind of the younger generations come up, they actually expect those well-being support and that kind of things, that kind of respect of the individual and looking at every single person as an individual to be in place already. So I think that's kind of driving some of the change as well in terms of what that recruitment looks like. But I think there is so much positive change. Like, I think we've extended the protected period so that it applies to both men and women when they return from statutory leave, because we were seeing a lot of fathers when they tried to do things like shared parental leave, even though that is an excessively complicated system. We were seeing a lot of people being victimized because of that, and actually that protection is going to really help. We've seen a lot more open-mindedness around other forms of families and thinking about how to support equally with adoption leave and maternity leave, and making sure all of that kind of evens out. So I think there is so much positivity and so much kind of engagement on positive change and support moving forward. It doesn't mean that there aren't still, as I say, those horror stories and those people who feel unsupported and those people who feel anxious, quite rightly. But I think overwhelmingly, people are trying to support in every way that they can and are very open-minded to that.
That's good. And I think, you know, like you said, I think sometimes people just don't know what to say. And so sometimes the awkwardness causes people to say the wrong thing as well. And then when you're on the other side, you're, you know, perhaps more sensitive given the current situation. So it all kind of builds up, whereas actually just those open and honest conversations up front are just so powerful with your employer.
Yeah. definitely. And I do think I think in general, in terms of we're talking about employer respect for employees, I think COVID has quite a lot to do with that, in terms of we all got a glimpse into each other's lives much more than we maybe had before, and we kind of all have started to appreciate from that people did have home lives, people had families, people had things, and you would see more of that. And I think that's really influenced kind of the continued trajectory of how do we support what that looks like and keeping that going. So I think obviously COVID was disastrous in a whole heap of ways, but I do think it'd be very interesting to, in a kind of butterfly effect world, to see where we would be without that. And it's interesting. There's a whole bunch of other really positive things. Things like flexible working requests are changing, and there's going to be hopefully some changes to make it so that you are assumed to be allowed to flexibly work unless you're told not to. And all these kinds of things are just tipping the balance slightly. The government childcare will really help working parents, if that actually ever comes through, but it will come through. But I was talking to a nursery and they were like, we know as much as you do. Isn't it coming in like 3 months? Yes, it is. There's just, I think it's, the more we respect the fact that if we think about it more long over time, the more we respect the fact that everyone wants to work for employers and everyone sees the value in work, but also sees the value in having children and wants to do that and wants to have their families and wants to have that balance. And I think that's what everyone's searching for. And so it's in employers' interest to provide that, because otherwise they'll just go somewhere else.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Alicia. Thank you so much. It's been I've got so much to digest. There's a lot of information there, but thank you. If anyone wants any advice, that's employees or employers, how can they find you?
So we've got a website, thrivelaw.co.uk, and my email address is on there. There's a picture of me with red hair. Don't have red hair anymore, but I'm on there. So that's probably the best way. We've got an information box, and you can send some details in there, and we can arrange a call off the back of that. Happy to kind of have a chat about, I think, I am on Instagram, but I will see it if you message me. But I think it's just get in touch in whatever way you feel most comfortable, especially if you feel like, I mean, we've all been there, where you're so anxious that you just want to tell somebody and just feel like, well, I've checked off at least the starting point of talking about it with someone on my list, and then someone else can kind of guide me through. I'm happy to be that guide.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. I don't know if anyone has
any
questions came up, I suppose, if anyone had any thoughts while we were going.
All covered, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And thanks, Dora.
Thanks so much, Dora, for joining us.
No, thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Gemma, tell us about you, because I think you're in Dubai, aren't you?
Yes, I have been living in Dubai for the last 3 years now. Actually, this is my 3rd year. So I'm here with my 2 kids, 7 and 9, and my husband. So yeah, it's great when it's not too hot.
Yeah, I can imagine. I imagine it must get really hot. What's the weather like at the moment?
Hot, hot and getting hotter, it seems. I reckon 2 or 3 more weekends and it'll be manageable. But yeah, it's not good at the minute.
So tell us what
Heidi, you carry on. I was just gonna dive in and say, if you're really British, you can like give it a good go outside in Dubai at the moment. It's 36 degrees, but it's quite easy to baste out there.
Yeah. You know, when I go back to the UK, even a UK summer, I think is cold. I sit there with a coat on and freezing. I'm just so used to now living in this hot desert. But yeah. You wanted me to say what do I do? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Tell us about what you do.
So I am a pain relief coach, and I help people with chronic pain to recover without medication or surgery, basically by teaching them about the latest science and research to do with pain, and helping them to get out of the pain fear cycle, which it's so easy to get into. With surprisingly quick and good results. You know, it's a whole new way of looking at pain. So it's an exciting field.
And how did you? So that's very interesting. But I mean, how on earth did you even get into that field?
Oh, yeah. So I got into this field because I lived with back pain for 10 years and I went down the traditional medical route, medication, physio, osteopaths, chiropractors, up until the point of having injections in my spine just to get enough relief from the pain. And when my kids were tiny, I couldn't even lift them from the floor to a high chair. Like the pain was excruciating. So after sort of exhausting every single thing apart from surgery, I was literally on the waiting list for surgery. And then someone got me onto neuroplastic pain, which is what I discovered that I have. And which a lot of people have. Neuroplastic pain basically means the brain is misfiring signals into your body, creating pain long after the actual thing is healed. So yeah, and then within the space of 2 or 3 months, I was having days with no pain at all, and then shortly after, I was back to doing everything I've always done. So I think realizing how easy it is, relatively easy it is with the right education, that was the turning point for me to pivot my career and throw myself into this new field, which has been so rewarding. I can't tell you, like, just to see people, especially mums, just seeing mums get back to being mums without that kind of heavy, it's exhausting having any kind of chronic pain. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's really hard for mums because obviously we're juggling so many different things and we've got so many things going on in our heads. I feel like I've got like 20 tabs open all the time. So what were the effective strategies that you put in place then to try and get over this back pain?
Well, the first thing was really understanding the science behind pain. And pain is a signal that's trying to tell us something. So like you put your hand on a hot stove and the pain tells you, I must lift my hand off right now. But what happens with chronic pain is the body should heal naturally within, most things should heal within 3 months. But if it goes on longer than 3 months, what's effectively happening is the pain signal is still firing, telling you this should be painful. So for some people, it's like sitting should be painful, or for some people, standing should be painful. And there's many different symptoms with chronic pain, but ultimately it comes down to the body or the brain, let's say, thinking that there is something wrong with you. And then we very quickly get into the pain fear cycle. So the very first thing was understanding the science. And then the second thing, and the most important thing, was not being scared of the pain. And the minute you can get rid of that fear around the pain and just allow it to be a sensation that's there and you're not scared of it, then that's when you're back in control and you can start to move through it. And then I think alongside that is recognizing the reason I was in that state in the first place is because my nervous system was really in overdrive. Like it was working, it was telling me I should be scared, but my nervous system was what we call dysregulated, and I needed to get back down to a state of calm. It's only when you can calm your nervous system that your body will heal itself. So yeah, that's a very high level description of what I did, but yeah.
How do you, I guess, Heidi and I were reflecting before this conversation where we both had instances of pain, and you helped me personally, Gemma, through mine, where I was ready to have an operation on my foot, which was due to an issue came up on the MRI, so I was sold on it. But actually, after practicing some of the techniques that you taught me, I was able to overcome it. And now it feels like it's completely fine. But when you're in that state of, which was amazing, so thank you again. But when you're in that state of, I've forgotten the words you used, but where you're kind of dysregulated, how do you know that you're in that state? Like, how do you become aware? Because I found whenever I'm incredibly stressed, it feels like the world's like coming in and I see no way out, and you just don't see clearly. And, I think that would be really relevant for our listeners, particularly with crazy families or the pregnant, or across the board?
And I really like this question because there's not a straightforward answer. If you'd have said to me, are you stressed at the height of, like, I had the worst back pain ever. I had 2 kids and I was leaving the house in the morning to go and do a full-time job and then come home and try and be super mum in the evening and then super wife after that. Like, if you'd have said to me, are you stressed? I would have said no. At no point did I kind of think that I was stressed at all. Like, because I was juggling so many things, I couldn't afford to drop a single ball. And so what was happening is my body was stressed and it was showing the signs with back pain. Now, for some people, it would be migraine, pelvic pain, fibromyalgia. Like, there's so many different ways that the body can react. Hair loss, skin, itchy skin. The list is almost endless, right? And everyone has a different thing, but it's actually easier for people to feel physical pain than emotional pain in many cases. So this is why it was an interesting question. Like, what does it feel like? For me, it felt like back pain. But I do know for other people, it might feel like anxiety, like heart palpitations, just really, really on edge. I think looking back, the indicators for me, other than the back pain, I was very snappy with the kids. They would do something, they're great kids, but they would do something and I'd find myself going, all the time. Like, and then there was always this like little voice in my head going, why me? Why do I have to feed them? Why do I have to do the washing up? Why? Like, almost like I was a victim, but I never voiced it. It was just like going round and round in my head, like I have to do everything. And I just did do everything. But I kind of was suppressing it the whole time. Does that make sense? Do you resonate with that? It's like, it's hard being a mum.
Yeah.
Like, really, really hard. But if I look back on how I was then versus how I am now, I'm a lot more allowing now. Like, I just kind of go with the flow. I'm a lot more, take it easy. I'm more of a take it easy type person.
I think for me and Heidi, I'd be interested in your reflection as well. When I had the issue with my foot, it was actually quite a long time after I had been really stressed. So it was like I was actually getting into, like, I mean, I've completely changed the way that I operate and what I do as a career because of, I just sort of had a realization that I wanted to do something completely different. And with that became a lot less stress because I'd gone from like a big corporate job. But I found the pain actually came like sometime afterwards, like a year after. So when we were talking, I was like, well, I'm not stressed, but I had been through some like really big things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd say that's probably the same for me. And that's why it's so hard to pinpoint it sometimes, like to an actual event or something that's happened. If it comes out, like you say, months later. But that's definitely something to be aware of, that can happen. The symptoms obviously come out, later, because I think sometimes when we then relax, because we've removed ourselves from that stressful situation, that's when the body suddenly goes, oh, I've been through something quite traumatic, actually. And then it comes out a lot later, doesn't it? And so I just find it so interesting, especially for mums, because we're so busy juggling so many different things. We don't really take the time to try and figure out what is actually going on. I'm just also thinking, Gemma, about the healthcare professionals as well. Obviously, when they're talking to their patients about chronic pain, are there any sort of tools or practices that could support them in learning more about this?
Yeah, I think the key is a doctor, let's say, has got 10 minutes maximum with a patient, right? And the question that they need to be asking, instead of like, tell me about the pain, let's have a look at this MRI, I think the question is, how are you? Like, how are you really? What's going on for you? But unfortunately, it's 10 minutes long enough to open that subject with someone, you know, and so many times the subject's not opened, but a lot of the answers would lie in that question, you know. Really having the patient feel like they've been properly seen and heard. And also when it comes to chronic pain, doctors, like I mentioned at the beginning, like if it's due to a dysregulated nervous system in the brain, like it's literally the brain misfiring signals. So if you're going to see a skin specialist about your skin, or a back specialist about your back or foot, like Marissa, those doctors aren't trained on the brain. So no matter what they do, they're not going to find the root cause of the issue. So I think it's just having an awareness that there is something other than physical that could be going on. It's interesting that you asked that question right now, because there's a book I recommend to absolutely everybody. It's called The Way Out by Alan Gordon. It's amazing. It's so easy to read, and it talks in a very almost like humorous way about chronic pain. And I love his style and simplicity of this subject. And so I'm right in the middle of doing his practitioner training right now. It's every Sunday evening. So I was literally doing it the other night. And that course is made up of coaches like me, but also a lot of doctors are on there. And so the other day I was partnered with a doctor. We're in a big Zoom room, and I was partnered out with this doctor, and it was so cool to be with a doctor that was open enough to be like, this makes sense, I get it. And you could see the relief on her face that she doesn't have to find all the answers using MRI scans, because the answers are not in those scans. She's been looking in the wrong place. And so I'm hoping more and more doctors will start to look at the latest research and science and do that. But the answer is always, the clients have the answer, or the patients, you know, what is going on emotionally right now? Or like Marissa said, like it was like, what's been going on in the last year? You know, what was the question to ask would be, well, when this started, what was going on? And the answer will be like, oh, it was when my mother passed away, or it was 3 weeks after this happened, or 2 weeks after that happened. Like everyone has different things that happen, redundancy, or a husband being made redundant, you know, all of these things, it can cause chronic pain, quite simply. So yeah.
If you're going through something currently,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, you know, a lot of women can have fear of giving birth, or they're very anxious during their pregnancy. They may have had a previous loss, or they might just be very sort of fearful and anxious anyway going through a pregnancy. What sort of techniques could they do to get through those 9 months?
Sure. Also a very interesting question, because if I reflect on my 2 pregnancies, I had back pain for 10 years, but during 2 pregnancies, I had 0 back pain. For 9 months, I had no back pain. And then the minute my son was born, the back pain came again. And then when the next one I was pregnant, no back pain whatsoever. And about two weeks after she was born, I couldn't get out of bed. I was in that much pain. So everybody is different. But I just wanted to share that. But going back to the fear question, it's about recognizing the fear, labeling it and admitting, you know what, I'm really scared about X, and then doing grounding techniques. So for example, asking yourself right now, am I safe right now? You know, find evidence to prove that you're safe right now. You know, I am sitting in a house that is safe. I have a family that is safe. I have I'm holding a teddy bear that's soft. Like things that are true right now. Anything that's true will pull you into the present, because fear is always about something that hasn't even happened yet. You know, and the fear of something is always worse than the actual event itself, because our brains are so smart that we catastrophize things, and then it becomes quite addictive. The more we worry, the more we need to worry, and it's almost like we think, well, if we worry, then it's somehow going to protect me from getting hurt, if that makes sense. but it's just a lot of wasted energy, the fear. So I would say acknowledge the fear, grounding techniques like breathing. I know everyone says breathing, but like really breathe in and then breathe out longer than the breath in. At least 5 or 10 times. You're not going to get anything to happen. But in very basic terms, when you do that, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. So your body just automatically goes calm. Putting your feet on the grass outside, or the sand if you're in Dubai. You're just getting outside and putting your feet and putting your hands in water, doing something that's just going to make you realize you are in the here and now, and you're really, really safe. The other thing I do personally, if I feel like I get a migraine or like a twinge in my back, I never ever reach for medication, because if you reach for medication, you mask in it. So whether it's anxiety and fear or physical pain, if you mask it, you're never going to solve it. So I usually get a piece of paper and I do a little spider diagram, and in the middle I write fear, and then all around the outside I put little arrows of what it could be, hypothetically what it could be. And I don't overthink it. I just start writing. Could it be family? Could it be job? Could it be this? And then because it's a spider diagram, it allows your brain just to relax, and you can shoot out all these different ideas. And more often than not, as I'm writing it, I can feel the emotion coming up when I start writing the sentence of the thing that's bothering me. But it's a practice. It's like just getting good at acknowledging, like, this could be a fear, this could be a fear, this could be a fear. And once it's on the paper, it's less of a fear because it's out of your head. So does that help?
Really interesting. Yeah, it does. And I'm thinking, so that was like really good as well from a prevention perspective. What would you say? So I think, Heidi, you gave the example before of you had, what was it, a galvanized shoulder?
Calcific tendonitis in my shoulder.
That's the one.
Close.
So if someone came to you and said they had calcific tendonitis in their shoulder and physically they felt pain, what would be your kind of like 2 to 3 immediate ways to act?
Well, firstly, I'm not a doctor, so I would say, is it life-threatening? Have you had it? Is this, what did you call it? Galvanized shoulder? Is it life-threatening? In this case, we obviously know it's probably not, right? But people need the peace of mind to know it is not life-threatening. Even like my back pain, L5S1, you can see on an MRI scan there's clear damage, but is it life-threatening? No, it's not. I would ask questions like, does it come and go? Does it move around? Is it worse in the morning and then better in the evening? Does an ice pack help? Does a heat pack help? And if you answer yes to these questions, then there's a very high chance it's neuroplastic pain, which means it is your brain misfiring. Because if it is actually structural, then the pain would be the same all of the time. There would be no pain in it. But we were talking before, and you did say like it kind of came on, and then it comes and goes. So that would be the first thing. I'd do a bit of an investigation as to like, does it move around? And I would ask questions. What's going on for you right now? And you what was it? COVID was happening? You said
right in the middle of COVID.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the reason I got into this work was I was already doing this work before COVID, and then COVID hit. I was living in Sri Lanka at the time, and we went onto a red list country, which means I cannot leave Sri Lanka even if I wanted to. And as soon as that announcement went out, my eye started twitching, like crazy twitching, like nobody else could see it, but my eye was going like this. And I thought, my eye is twitching because of stress. I can't do anything about this. I'm trapped on an island now. And I thought, if my eye's twitching, people all around the world are having neuroplastic pain symptoms. And I thought, I have to do this career. So COVID was a real tipping point for many, many people whose nervous systems was already quite stressed. And then that was probably the final straw, which turned it from like more of an emotional thing into a physical thing. So I've drifted off your question. What was it? Practical things that you would actually do?
Yeah, so practical. Yeah, no, that was really helpful.
But then it would just be a case of what do you, I would literally ask the question, what do you need right now? You know, and the question is probably like, the answer is probably like, I need some time on my own. I need a hug. I need to be angry with somebody. I need to something. I need to not be doing this family holiday we're about to do. You know, there's always going to be some answer to that question. What do I need? Because this might sound a bit woo-woo, but your shoulder's basically trying to tell you something, you know. So that's what I would do. There is a practice I do called somatic tracking, which I do with clients, and I know that you can find this also on Insight Timer and YouTube. And it's where I get the client to focus on the sensation. So I would say to you, like, can you describe it? And you would say, it's like a ball, it's like it's hot, it's like under my shoulder blade. And as you're describing it, I would get you to relax at the same time and keep on describing it. And the more you focus on it, the more the sensation either moves or dissipates, or it might get worse. But no matter what happens, it proves it's your brain that's doing that, because it's moving around. So you can do this somatic tracking from Insight Timer or YouTube. Does that help?
Or contact you. Yeah.
Or contact me. Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite hard to do it yourself, because your conscious can't talk to your subconscious. So it is one of those things that's easier when somebody does it for you. But yeah, for anyone listening with chronic pain that's been suffering, has tried everything medically, please don't think it's the end of the line, because it's not. There's so many people that are getting fully recovered after they discover that it's their brain misfiring signals. So there's hope.
Yeah, it's amazing, because I think when I had it, I did something basic. I remember you telling me, I think you just sort of said it anecdotally, just to focus on, like, go and get a cup of tea and focus on the weather or something like that, which is very British. And I remember walking down the stairs thinking, my foot hurts. And normally I'd start limping, but I was like, oh, I really want a cup of tea. And isn't it hot outside? And then I just like kept repeating it. And yeah, and then it disappeared and it stayed away. So it is amazing, but it's incredible really how many people live with chronic pain. Like, you know, I would say, let's throw something out there, about 30% of people I know have got an ongoing issue, you know, it's just not resolved easy. Like my mum's got frozen shoulder, which is physically frozen. I tried to get her to I was like, what's going on for you? But she wasn't that receptive. But Aaron, my husband, has a bad back, which he admits is stress.
Yeah, but even a frozen shoulder, that is definitely, like 99% sure that is something that's neuroplastic pain. It's a reflection of, like, it's frozen because there's tension in the body, you know. But yeah, it's hard when someone you're close to has something and you know you can help them, but it's not going to work for everyone. So yeah.
No, I think though it's about spreading this, you know, because it's people. I mean, I'm not sure about you, Heidi, but when I first spoke to Gemma, this was like the first time I'd really heard about it, and I was like, you know, ready to have an operation, which is bizarre, given that I was able to fix it without that.
Yeah, and you know, it's so funny because I live in this world, so I see clients all the time that have pain and don't have pain, and I'm talking to other practitioners that are working with people. So like for me, it's like so normal, and then I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna have back surgery next week, and I'm like, no. But what to do?
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is we use the word chronic pain a lot, but I never considered that I had chronic pain. It's not a word I even used until I became a practitioner in it. I always just assumed it would get better. Like, so for example, a lot of clients will be like, no, I don't have chronic pain. And then they're doing this. And I'm like, is there something wrong with your shoulder? And they're like, oh, yeah, it only hurts like once a month. Or like I spoke to a woman and she went, oh, I only get migraines once a month now. And I said, you get migraines once a month? And she went, oh, but that's nothing. I used to get migraines every week. And so she had decided that she's going to live with migraines once a month. And like, as if that's normal. I was like, you don't have to live with migraines once a month. This is something we can do something about, you know, but we just accept it. But I'm sure she wouldn't have considered that chronic pain. It's just the way she is, you know.
I found this fascinating, and I can already think of about 3 or 4 people that I really want to listen to this podcast, because I think it will really help them, because they have been living with the same sort of pain for ages. So I can't wait to share this with them and get them to listen in, because I think it would really, really help them. So thank you so much, Gemma. This has just been an eye-opener. I've learned so much today. I really have.
Yeah, and we've only literally just scratched the surface of this subject. It is absolutely fascinating. And if even one person listening to this goes and starts doing something they've not done for ages because they're not scared of the pain anymore, that's a win. That's a big win, you know.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. So
And
how can people get in touch with you and find out more information about the services you offer?
So my website is my name, which is Gemma with a G, mcfall.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm really not yet on Instagram. I keep trying, but I'm just not cool enough for it. So you'll find me on my website or on LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you. And do you have any final thoughts or messages that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, if someone's listening to this thinking they have either ongoing anxiety or some kind of chronic pain, or even someone that's close to them, I do have on my website, it's called a free assessment, but to be very honest, there's no definite answer at the end of it. But what it will give you is a list of personality types that are more susceptible to getting chronic pain. And it has a list of questions, like I was asking Heidi earlier, like, does your pain move around? It's got questions about your specific symptoms. And it also has questions about childhood, because if somebody had like a difficult childhood or some kind of trauma, that is also an indicator that it could cause chronic pain as an adult. So I would say that's a really, really good starting point to click on that and just read through those questions. But, explore this. Like, it has literally changed my life, getting my back getting my back back. Getting my back back has changed my life. And that my kids now have a mum that's not stressed and grumpy. I can pick them up, I can do silly things with them, and I want that for everyone. I really do. So yeah, please reach out with questions or whatever, or I'm happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been incredibly insightful, and I know our listeners will take a lot just from the podcast, and we'll obviously share your details as to where they can find you and contact you direct. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma.
Now, it is a simple idea that has saved a life. A list of warning signs given to expectant parents indicating possible problems during pregnancy. For one family from Lincolnshire, a chance look at the notes prompted them to get checked at hospital. 4 hours and an emergency delivery later, baby Amelia was born 6 weeks premature. Our health correspondent Vicky Johnson has this.
She means everything in the world, absolutely everything in the world. It's absolutely amazing just to be a mum.
Amelia, the most precious of babies. Her arrival comes after endless rounds of fertility treatment and after her older sister was stillborn.
Hi guys, how are you doing?
Every day we just can't stop smiling at her, can we?
No.
Amelia, though, was 6 weeks premature, and her mum Bev only went to hospital after checking the advice printed on a wallet given out by midwives.
Nothing felt right. I just needed to get checked out, and I just looked at the wallet and thought, I need to see what it says, and it just said, trust your instincts.
The Wellbeing Wallets are produced by a charity aimed at reducing the number of stillbirths. They're usually given out to parents who've lost a baby, but midwives here are giving them out to all expectant mums across northern Lincolnshire.
This is key information, key concerns, when to be worried, when not to be worried. So actually it's just really important. I hoped and I knew they would be beneficial.
Amelia was born following emergency surgery after a scan revealed a problem with blood flow to the placenta.
I just couldn't stop crying because it was a weird feeling, because I was obviously excited and overjoyed, and brilliant that Amelia was here and I heard her cry. But also my mind just went back 18 months ago, because when Alicia was born, I never got to hear Alicia cry.
Proper little sweetheart. And his little princess.
Bev and Pete had the happy ending they've always craved, and now it's hoped the plastic wallets will help many other families too. Vicky Johnson, BBC Look North, Wintringham.
Lovely stuff. A strong message here to read the leaflets and the plastic wallet.
Ava's Fund has been set up in memory of our second daughter, who was stillborn on the day before her due date. This fund has been set up and is working with a registered charity based in Bridgewater called Towards Tomorrow Together. And our aim, whilst working with them, is to raise awareness of and reduce the stillbirth rates across the southwest.
We've raised £11,000 so far. Initially, it was for a few different charities that first helped us, and now it's for Ava's Fund.
Yeah. In the introduction of the Mama Academy wallets, at a cost. So these are the wallets, and that's at a cost of £7,800. And that will fund 10,000 wallets, which basically covers on average a 2-year period at Derriford Hospital for the number of pregnancies they have every year. And the idea is that these are given to mums at their booking in appointment. They keep their pregnancy notes inside, and it's got key information to protect, to look after mum and baby from day 1 of pregnancy to giving birth. Right. Points out key information and things that we weren't necessarily aware of, like call your maternity unit immediately if anything happens, any of these things happen. These are the normal signs of labour, trust your instincts, and there's a massive section on the back about monitoring your baby's movements, and it helps eliminate the tales, the old wives' tales that you're sometimes told, like baby's movements slow down. Every NHS trust that these have been introduced within, they've proven to have a positive impact and reduce their stillbirth rates. So if we can do that locally and help other families, prevent it from happening to other families, it's such a simple idea, but it can make such